So let's go ahead and let's give ourselves some walls so we don't fall off the world here. And actually what I'm going to do, just so we can steer a little bit farther, I'm going to increase the scale of my floor. So I went ahead and clicked on the floor. I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy right here. And notice that for scale, it gives you these little box things. So I'm just going to stretch this guy out. Stretch this guy out. So why don't we make it 3 by... well, let's make it 2 by 2. So 2 wide, 2 the other wide, and one tall, where 1 unit on a plane is flat. Okay, so now we have a little bit bigger thing, so we can drive a little farther before we go off, but we still want to give ourselves some walls. But just so you can see, I have more space now where I can drive for a while. Oh, whoa. That was total savant mode right there that I didn't die. All right, so a little bit bigger board. But now let's give ourselves some walls that we can build on there. So this kind of starts becoming like practice for how do you manipulate in the 3D world. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a empty game object. And I'm going to name this guy walls. Okay, so think of this as almost like a folder to hold my walls. Because as you imagine, we're building a pretty simple scene here, right? But when you start building something more complex, you're going to start getting into lots of stuff over there. Hopefully, I'll have our Bible VR thing set up in our final place. By the way, did you get my message earlier?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to call it 98%. I talked to the decision maker and he seemed, so no promises, but it felt good. So hopefully maybe you'll even let me know tomorrow. But anyways, hopefully I'll have the Bible VR set up so everybody can come in and check out what they worked on. And most of the stuff for the last scene, it was Joseph here. So if you really think it's bad, I would let him know. He worked very hard on it. He's a little slow coding, but actually it looks pretty nice.
He's been there a lot.
Yeah, but just because you spend a lot of time on something doesn't mean you accomplish a lot.
He did seem pretty homeless.
Hey, it actually usually goes the other way, and don't they say is those who can't do teach? I think that's the saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. See?
Explains a lot about you.
It's the way I'm telling you, I'm getting old. I can't even write. This eye is useless. The fact that this is way too small on the screen. I can't see any of this. No, because then things won't fit on the screen. It's already higher or smaller resolution than normal. Okay, so I built this empty game object. The guy it's nothing visible in the scene. I'm just using it as kind of a folder to hold on to my walls. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on that guy, and I'm going to create a cube. And notice it nests that cube inside of the walls. If I didn't want to right click on walls and create the cube, I could have created it outside here. I'll create another cube out here. And then you can drag it into walls, and now it's nested in there. So you have the ability to just move things around all you want. Let me get rid of that second one real quick. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this guy out to the side here so we can kind of see him. Okay. Now, if you remember here, our floor has a scale of 2, but that is relative to the default scale of a plane. Notice if I come here to a cube and I change this guy's scale, let's keep that as a, he has not become as large as the plane, has he? Because all I did is I doubled the size of the default cube. So really, to get this guy close, I'm going to go ahead and click on the cube. I'm going to click on his scale. and I'm gonna drag it until he's, in the ballpark of how big the sides are. Now, just so I can see the difference here, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go into my materials folder. And let's go ahead and create a new material. What color should the walls be?
Brown.
Brown? That's not very creative.
Make them purple.
Purple?
Match your shirt.
I like the shirt.
Yeah. I like all your shirts.
Who wouldn't? My wife picked them out. Except then whenever I get a shirt that gets a hole in it, she throws it out. Because, I think this might be a guy thing, but I'm not positive. But do we, wear things until they literally just wear out?
Yeah, pretty much.
I have some clothes that I don't want to get rid of because, I like the way it fits. But, she won't be seen in public with me. That really can't be considered clothes anymore.
Unless you've got, this giant grease stain on the front, then...
When you're a fat guy, it's pretty much all clothes. Yeah. So, she actually carries the stain stick stuff in the purse.
Just for you.
Oh, she's always prepared. Tell you what, when we went to Israel, not this summer, but the last summer, everybody was a huge fan of hers because she has basically a whole medicine cabinet with her at all times. So anybody who had any sort of stomach distress from eating too much hummus, went to her for the medicine. She's always prepared. All right, so we're going with purple, you said? All right, can I make a purple? Is that a purple? Oh, look at this. That purple? All right, so we'll drag that onto the wall. There's our purple wall. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, we're going to call this guy the west wall. And I am going to, actually I'm still going to deal with scale, but I want to get in front of that guy. And we're going to make him taller so we can see him. Okay, now right now he's probably bridging the gap between the, well, first of all, he's not up against the scene yet. So now I'm going to move to the position on the west wall again. So I'll go ahead and drag him here. Drag him here. We'll call that close enough. Something like that. Now let's look at it from a couple different angles. How do I rotate on this thing? There we go. So I'm used to using this with a mouse. So if you right click, that gives you a little eye thing there. Then you can drag around to get yourself in different positions so you can kind of see where you are relative to the rest of the things. So I see here that my west wall is hovering substantially above the ground.
Are you using orthogonal or perspective view?
What do you mean?
I don't know, it just looks very not entirely right. Like the back seems larger than the front.
Oh, and actually, Alexis, I think this was the view you were in.
I told you.
Well, I didn't teach it to you yet, so I assume that you were following my normal rules.
Well, now I figured it out though. Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, so when you do this, you are breaking the standard planes. So if you want to reset, you'd have to click up there and it goes back to that. So now I can look at it from these different levels. So Y is right above, X is straight on, and since the plane looks gone right now, I must be, actually let me, if I just shift up just a little bit. It looks pretty good, right? Close enough. All right. So, because one thing you do, it does take a little bit of practice with this to kind of look at the different views to make sure you don't have gaps, make sure it doesn't actually look like that. There, I'll make a big enough gap where if I'm looking at, let's go on X and I scroll up like this. So you can kind of see the gap there. I don't know how to create the, maybe like this. You might assume there's not a gap there, is what I'm saying, if you aren't looking at all the different perspectives. And then when you actually come in here and go, you notice there's a big hole here, and you just fall down. And so you want to kind of mess with the different perspectives to get your walls in the correct place. All right, so once I have that guy where I want him, and I think he looks pretty good here. All right, let's call that good. Now I'm going to make my east wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my west wall. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to call this guy east wall. And I'll put him at position 1155. And I'll drag him over a little bit. Ugh. All right, it looks pretty decent. So we'll zoom back out. So there's two walls. Now, before I do anything else with these walls, since those walls are up against it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit play. And I'm going to drive over to this wall. And we see we can bump into it, right? Now, the reason we were able to bump into this guy is because my walls have box colliders on them. So even though they are not rigid bodies themselves, they have box colliders. And because my player has a sphere collider that is not a trigger, he will interact with other colliders, and because he's a rigid body, he will interact with other colliders based on that. Make sense? So the default physics engine is what gets used for bumping into stuff, since I have all the triggers turned off. All right, if I come into these walls and I turn off the box collider in them, now there's no way for them to know that they're colliding with a rigid body. Okay, so we want to have our box colliders enabled for those guys. So now what I'll do is I'll take my west wall, we'll duplicate it, and let's do the north wall. All right, now what I need to do is I'm going to bring it out here to the middle. And I'm going to rotate it. All right, so I rotated it 90 degrees on the Y axis. And I'll go ahead and push that guy into position. And I'm going to, when I click on Y up here, I'm looking straight down on it. So I'll be able to see when that gap disappears. I'll go ahead and duplicate the north wall. We'll call this south wall. And we'll drag that guy down here. Something like that. Test all our walls. All right, so seems pretty good. Okay, so now we kind of have our world that we can drive around on, if you will. So kind of going back to the tutorial thing, now they want to show you how you can use some of these box colliders. We were talking about triggers before. What if you want to pick up stuff? Okay, you want to make collectible things, like in a game, you might want to pick something up. So we'll go back in here. So our collectible objects, yeah, this will actually look pretty cool. So let's show this anyways. I think they're doing this with, I'm pretty sure they're doing it with boxes, with spheres, but it'll look kind of cool. So here, I'm gonna steal this update method here real quick. Because notice that update happens every frame. So what they're doing is they're changing the rotation on this to rotate on, let's see, this is rotating about, what axis would this be? This is 15 radians on X, 30 radians on Y, 45 radians on Z, and then times delta time says, it kind of smooths it out and says, let's do this over, instead of per frame, it's meters per second. So it gives it a kind of a smooth rotation instead of a jagged frame rotation. So we'll see it in action here in a second. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to create something to collect. Then we're going to actually collect it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a 3D object, and we're going to create a cube. All right, and we're going to call this guy Collectible. And maybe make these guys yellow. Or do we have another preference? Yellow's good. It's not quite yellow. All right, that's as yellow as it's going to get. Yellow-ish. And we'll go ahead and make our collectible yellow. Okay, now I'm going to shrink this guy down a little bit. So I'm going to make it scale 0.5 by 0.5 by 0.5. And I'm also going to turn it up so it looks like a diamond. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to rotate this guy. I'm going to pull it up this way. And then I'm going to rotate it. No, actually that should be okay. So let's do -45, then 0, 0. Good enough. And then actually, let's just make him a little, kind of a little taller. I don't like either of those. Just leave it like that. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the, I'm going to make this guy a rigid body. That way we can give physics to him, so he'll drop down to the ground. So we'll add a rigid body to him. Gravity is turned on by default right here. We'll start this, and there's our, so notice that I can knock that guy over. All right, so what we're going to do is, now what would I do right now if I want to make it so I can't knock him over? Well, I could turn off the box collider. You are right. I could completely turn off the box collider, but I promise you when we go to collect it, we're going to want a box collider. But I can make it a trigger. Okay, triggers say, don't let normal physics take over. I will handle what it means when I get collisions. And right now I'm not handling it because I didn't write the, oh, yeah, he's going to do that. See, we need to make his rigid body. No, he's going to still float up in the air then. So now we got to go back to my trick, where we call the trigger and then, so let's leave it as a real thing right now and not hit him just so we can see the thing. All right, so he's sitting there like that. I'm going to go ahead and let's make a script that will make this guy do a rotation thing on update so we actually see it. You know, he's like, come and collect me type thing. All right, so we'll go back here to our scripts folder. We'll create a C# script. And let's call this the collectible script, whatever. And for our collectible, we're going to give that guy, gotta turn off the game running. So we're going to give that guy the script. I'm going to go ahead and edit the script. And we're going to replace that update method with this update method, where every frame we're going to set this collectibles transform. We're going to rotate it this times delta time. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, he is rotating, but he fell over when he landed because he landed on a corner. So I think one thing we can do then, because he's up in the air first.
Do you have to have him on the floor?
I don't. What we can actually do is we can, yep, I can bring him down near the floor. Okay, so that would be on the floor. So now he's above the floor right there. Then we can turn off gravity, so he's just floating there, which then would allow me to do the trigger thing, because I don't have to worry about him falling through. And now he should be rotating. All right, looks pretty decent. All right, so now if I want multiple of those collectibles, I'm going to go ahead and create an empty game object. We'll call this guy Collectibles. Am I spelling collectible right? Well, I care a little bit. I want to learn. Is it spelled right? I think it's spelled right. Is it an I or an A?
I don't think there's an
Okay, then I probably have it right then. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate this guy. So I made 5 more of them. And what I'm going to do is, let's see, we need to change his X position. It's kind of, having them on their side like this kind of sucks because now you can't just easily, well, actually, can you easily? Yeah. Yeah, I can hand drag it, but I think this is going to move it up in the air now.
You are missing an elbow.
And am I?
Yeah.
Maybe I have 2 L's.
There's just 3.
No, collectible. Oh, it would be, yeah. I have the collectibles right. These are collectibles. You remind Shiva of this next time I make fun of his English. It's like, dude can't even spell. All right, so let me just space these out a little bit. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Actually, this is the way to do it. Watch. So we're going to take all of these, and we see that the rotation is going to be -45, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the rotation. I'm going to reset the position on all of those guys. So now they're all at 0, 0. Okay, so now I'm going to drag those guys around the scene. Okay, so we have several of them there on the scene. And then what I'll do is I'll highlight all of these guys. And I'll set their rotation at -45. All right, they might be a little high up in the air. So let's put their rotation back at 0. All right, so make it at -0.5, and we should be good. Let's make it -0.7. All right, leave it like that. Oh, we don't even need to rotate it because of the way it's rotating with the 15, 30, 45. It actually makes it look kind of cool. So we'll just leave it like that. Now we want those guys to be collectible, right? So we can drive around, and all of those guys are currently triggers. So as we drive around, we're going to be able to go right through them right now, but we really want to know when we hit something, and we want to be able to collect it, right? So now I'm going to show you one problem we run into. So I'm going to make it so that the cubes know when we've collided with them. Okay, so because we have the trigger thing turned on, right? So we're going to go in, and so here's our collectibles. They all have the box collider. They all have the trigger on. So now we'll just edit our collectible script. We'll go into on trigger enter. So now we'll know when they get hit. Okay, we'll go ahead and print out collected. So on trigger enter for one of the collectible guys, when something enters that trigger, so for us, when the sphere rolls over that guy, he's going to become aware that something collided with him. So right now we're just going to print out proving that he knows that something collided with him. All right, so something printed out here. He knows that something collided with him. We'll go and collide with a different guy, in theory. Notice here, sometimes you'll see this thing. Notice it says 2 over here. It gives a count. So even though we only see it once here, it actually has happened twice. So it gives you a count for it. All right, so now those guys are aware that they're being run over. Now maybe what we want to do is we want to have the collectible thing disappear. Okay, so one thing we might be tempted to do is say destroy this dot game object. So we might want to destroy the game object associated with this guy. Okay, so let's save that. Okay, so that guy's gone. Now notice they're actually disappearing here in the game. which is okay because we literally destroyed them. Okay, they are gone. So now we've got all of our collectibles. Now, what if we wanted to keep score, though? So one thing we could have done, so I'm going to go a couple different directions here. So in this case, we just had the collectibles kill themselves when they ran into anything. Well, what if we want the player to collect the collectible that it ran into? So it actually has that collectible, or at least gives himself a counter for how many collectibles he's collected or something like that. So we actually make the player then responsible for picking up or for destroying or whatever. So right now the collectibles themselves destroy themselves. So if I'm the collectible, I'm aware that something just bumped into me. Death. Now if we switch the perspective and we say, okay, well now I'm the player, I just rolled over a collectible, I became aware that I collided with it, now I want to collect it. But only if it was a collectible. Because the player can bump into other things, right? The player can bump into the ground. The player can bump into the walls. So we really only want to be able to collect collectibles. Make sense? Okay. So now we're back in this situation where I'm going to go to my sphere for my player. And I'm going to say, oh, well, why don't we make this guy a trigger? His sphere collider. Well, when we do that, what happens? He falls through the ground again, right? Because he's no longer acting the way we originally wanted him to act. So how could we, well, we saw earlier actually that we can say, well, we'll make it a trigger, and the first thing we'll do is we'll turn off his triggerness if we collide with something so that he won't fall through. But realistically, we kind of want him to, always not fall through. But I still want him to become aware that he bumped into something. How might we do that? Go ahead.
Give him a public attribute, make it a counter that the collectibles can increase.
Well, I want to start off by I want the player to be responsible for killing the collectibles. So that's what I want to start off with. So the player needs to know when he's bumped into a collectible. How does he do that? Well, we already saw we can play that game of I'm the trigger. So we'll brute force it. So here's my player. Here's my trigger. We'll go into the player script. That's my movement script, right? So we'll say on trigger enter. Okay. Very first thing I want to do is I want to not fall through the ground, right? So I do have the rigid body, so I'll say this dot RB dot I need the collider. I need this dot get component. The component associated with this guy is it's a sphere, so it's going to be a sphere collider. And I'm going to say he is no longer a trigger, at least for the moment. So as soon as he collides with something, we're going to turn off his triggerness. Okay? Then we want to ask, who did he collide with? Notice that on trigger enter, we get a variable called other, of type collider. So we can find out who we collided with, whether it was a wall, whether it was something else. But we do this through something called a tag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in here. I'm going to make all my collectibles here. So notice we have this thing called for tag for these guys. And right now it says untagged. And we have some default tags that are in here. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a tag. and I'm going to add something to the list. I'm going to call this guy Collectible with the L. Okay. So we have that. I'll select these guys again. So I have all of them selected. And now we have collectible as an option here. So all of these game objects are tagged as collectible. None of my other game objects are tagged at all. Now what I can do in the script here is after I've turned my trigger off, that way I won't fall through the world, I can then ask the question, if other, that's the guy I collided with, dot tag is equal to collectible. Okay, so if I bumped into something that was collectible, then I'm going to say destroy other dot game object. So if I bumped into something that was a collectible, destroy it. Now, turn my trigger back on. That way I have the opportunity to connect back to something else, to roll into something else. This is going to be pretty inefficient, okay? Because right now I have this sphere that's in this constant state of falling through the floor. And right before he falls through, he turns off his trigger. And he says, what did I hit? And if it was a collectible, he destroys it. If it wasn't, he turns it on again and starts falling again. So we might see a flicker. We'll actually probably see him actually be able to work himself through the floor. So he did work himself through the floor. I promise you that trigger thing got hit. But he got hit over, and he just kept colliding, and finally he just fell through the floor. Probably not the way we want to pull this off. It works for a single collision, right? We were able to kind of do that. Like when he first hits the ground, I kind of want to know that the game started. So kind of when Mario drops down to the scene, as soon as his feet hit the floor, maybe I want to have that as a trigger. That way I know the game started. I can start my monsters marching around, something like that. So I could do it once. I could do the trigger fake out once, but this whole repeating thing doesn't work so well. So what can I do, problem solving wise, to make it so that I can collide with my collectibles as triggers, yet have the player be in charge of who he hit? So we've already seen we can go the easy route and have the collectible be in charge. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just creating a scenario here where we have to think about this a little bit. I want the player now to be in charge of destroying the collectible, but I also don't want him to fall through the ground. Go ahead.
Well, you just had it so like if it hit something, it would turn its trigger off and then see what it hit. So is there a way to set it like saying like, oh, if it hits something before it turns its trigger off to, or like if it hits something to like do the tag thing, sort of saying like if that's collectible without using like the full trigger?
I think that the tag thing is viable. We definitely want to use that. The trigger thing is not the solution. What we've kind of proven here is that triggers have a purpose, and the defined purpose for them is not to toggle them on and off constantly.
Yeah, so is there a way to like in the code you had, I can't remember what the line specifically was, but like for this not get component thing, is there a way to do that so it's like checks right away to see if it's a collectible?
Well, but if I don't turn the trigger off, he's going to fall through the ground anyways. So it doesn't even matter if I check beforehand or not. I need this guy to be able to be drivable. He needs to drive over the place, so I can't have him falling through the ground. Yeah.
Is there a way to add kind of normal collision behavior within the trigger itself?
Short answer is probably. I'm not necessarily sure how to pull it off. Actually, my guess is probably not, because I don't think you can programmatically manage the physics. It's just the physics system. So I don't think you can programmatically do it. So think out, literally pun intended, so this will be the hint. Think outside of the box or outside of the sphere. What's important to us here is that the sphere doesn't fall through the ground, right? We want that guy's collider to be able to deal with normal physics. But I also want him to be able to bump into other things, right? So can I surround him with some invisible objects that have trigger colliders on them? So it almost has like a little bumper. And if the bumpers bump into my collectibles, then I'll collect them. That makes sense? So then we have to, so this is kind of learning a skill of how does the bumper talk to the player? So, well, yeah, we are going to make it a child. That way it moves with the player. But specifically, if the bumper collides with something, how does he tell the player to collect what he collided with? That's what I'm really getting at here. So let's just give ourselves one bumper just so we save some time and don't have to create this. So we have to hit it dead on. Right? We kind of have it's like a ram that we have to hit it with. All right. So I'm going to zoom in here on our sphere. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click on the sphere. And we are going to create let's do a cylinder. All right, so there's a cylinder on that guy. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to rotate this. Yeah. All right. And then we're going to scale it down. Oh, this will allow me to hit it frontwards or backwards. It might be worth it. Oh, actually, this would be even better. Yeah, this is going to be better. This won't matter if we are going to hit it sideways or whatever. All right, so I'm actually going to add to my sphere a plane. And I'm going to go to the side here. We're going to elevate that plane kind of high up on the sphere because all of our dudes are kind of high, right? Actually, you know what? A plane would work, but I want to make sure we hit the guys. So I'm actually going to make it a cube. So we're going to put a cube here. We're going to bring them up about halfway up on the sphere. I'm going to get a top view of this guy. And we're going to, actually, let's get the side view again. Yeah, I think he'll cover what the sphere would hit, right? I think we're good there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to shrink him down a little bit. Like that. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off his renderer. So you can't see him. So now it's like my sphere has a little hat. It's an invisible hat. And that guy has a box collider that is a trigger. So we're going to come back here and we're going to create we'll create a C# script. We'll call this our bumper. We'll have our on trigger enter. Then we'll say if other dot tag is equal to collectible, then found a collectible. something like that. So my bumper is going to know how to interact with collectibles, at least know that we found them, while at the same time my player won't have a trigger associated with it. Let me save that, go back in here, go back to my sphere, and we're actually, well, let's rename this cube and call this guy the bumper. So sphere, I'm going to turn off the trigger for my sphere. And then let's go ahead and turn off the on trigger enter for that guy, because we want my sphere to just operate off of normal. Huh?
That was the bumper.
Thank you. It was testing you and you passed. All right. This is the way we're at. Take it out of that for the sphere. But the bumper, this guy, we're going to go ahead and add the bumper component script, the script we just wrote. So he's going to know how to collide with things. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to click over here to my console. Hold on, why are they, oh, haha. I need to take the collectible scripts off of these guys because they are killing themselves. Okay, and these guys should have box collider, so I'm going to turn the trigger off on those. That way they will respond to things hitting them. All right, so now the bumper associated with the, why did he disappear? Something still has something. Yeah, but I have the check mark off of it, so that's not the guy that's doing it. I could probably leave the, actually I do want to leave the trigger on this because I don't want to be able to bump into them. But I'm still trying to figure out why he disappeared. So this will allow me to drive right through it, but they're still disappearing. Notice we did have the found collectible, so the bumpers are working. They are finding these collectibles. Am I destroying my collectibles in more than one place? Inside of my bumper behavior, I'm just saying found a collectible. I guess let's actually remove that component. Should be disabled, but so none of those guys have that component anymore. Okay. Yeah, that's weird. I had the component disabled, but it seemed like it was still attached to them. All right, so now these guys know about the that they're getting hit. The bumper knows that they're hitting something, but it's only printing out if they actually ran into something that was destroyable. So now I can have the bumper then kill off the thing, but I said I wanted the player to actually know that something happened. So I have a couple of different ways I can do this. I'm going to let the bumper, I'm going to go into our bumper script here. And we're going to create a public game object called player. So bumpers know about players. So when we find a collectible, we're going to say this dot player dot send message. And send message takes in the name of a method as well as a value, and then we can send in some options too, but we don't need to do that. So the message I'm going to send is I'm going to send the message collect. I'm going to write a a method inside of player called collect. And that method is going to take the game object to collect, which in this case is other.gameObject. All right, so when this bumper recognizes that what he just bumped into was a collectible, he's going to send a message to his player. So this is how game objects can communicate with each other. So he's going to send a message to his player and say, hey, player, collect. Here's the guy I want you to collect. So then over in player, this guy's movement script, we're going to write a function. I believe it can be private. I think. We might need to make this public, but I think it can be private. So we're going to say private void collect, and this guy will take in a game object, obj, and then we'll say destroy obj. Okay, so now the movement script of the player has a method called collect. The bumper will yell at the player, collect. The movement script will notice that he yelled collect. We'll call that function, taking in the thing that we're supposed to collect, and we'll go ahead and destroy that object. So the last thing we need to do is we need to let the bumper know about the player. We already wrote it into the script. We said, here's a public game object player. So now we need to go into Unity and actually drag the player in there. So here's our bumper. Here's our script that expects the player. I'll drag that player over there. Oh, we can do it. So now he knows about the player and he can send that message to the player. So he collected. Oh. Make sense? Okay. So, for next week, and I'll put the assignment up, and I'll actually give you this as a starting point if you want to extend. Actually, that might be a pretty big file. It'll be good if you do it yourself anyways. So I'm going to give this to you as a starting point. What I want you to do is I want you to keep track of how many elements were collected. Okay? So right here inside of our script, rather than, right now we're sending the message, so we have this guy communicating with movement. This is where the guy actually gets destroyed. We're probably going to have a variable in here for counting the number of things that were collected. And we need to have a way of showing that out on the screen. Okay? And just quickly, I'll get the ball rolling on that. Ha ha. So I'm going to add to my sphere here. I don't think that's going to show up. So we're actually going to do it a different way just so it'll be here. We go to my sphere. I'm going to add 3D object, 3D text. I'll call this guy value. I'm going to go ahead and position this on my player. So I have it 0, 1, 0. I'm going to put a 0 on it initially. Let's just see what it looks like when we go in here. Okay, so I need to move it over a little bit. All right, well, let's just assume that's That's okay. Assume it's centered, okay. Now for this text mesh, what you'll need to do is we need to change the character size relative to the scale. So if I make that guy 100, now it's a giant text. Oh, wait a minute, no. We'll make the character size 1. We'll make the font size 10. It's going to be blurry otherwise. Actually, I really think it is the character size. We make the character size 100, and we make the scale 0.001. Does that make it sharp? Well, this is just to get something up there. So right now it's just you can see it, but you can barely see it. So if we keep the character size at, the problem is that by default it's pretty blurry until you light it up some. So the way to do this is you make the font size a lot bigger and then scale it down, and then it looks sharp. But even if your number is fuzzy, that's okay. So we'll do it with a text mesh. So we have 3D text that we've added to our scene. It's going to be a text mesh. I want the number of things it collected to get onto that text mesh, which means that you're going to have a player know about his text mesh so he can write stuff to it. So this will be kind of practicing things we learned today. So you'll have to create a public variable for the text. You're going to find it. You keep track of the value and then make sure the text constantly says what the value says. Make sense? All right, so for next week, you're gonna kind of bring this tutorial up to this point, so you can collect stuff and you've kind of gotten used to using the tools on your own and things like that. You're gonna have your idea paper where you're selecting the Bible story that you want to that you want to build the experience for, and then you're gonna make a list of requirements. That is the what your experience will have in it in order for you to say it's good, it's done. Okay, go ahead.
So we're not doing like the requirements paper, just have like a list.
Yeah, I mean, so officially it's a requirements document, but it doesn't need to follow some sort of formal syntax, because I really want it to be something that's a checklist. So if you want to write out, if you want to kind of describe, this is what it means to have met this requirement, that's fine, if that will be helpful to you. But really just a checklist that says, my experience will have this, and this, and this. The guy should be able to do this. The guy should be able to do this. He should be able to move like this, things like that, so that when we sit down at the end of the semester, we should be able to go through and literally check off your accomplishments. Formal requirements documents are often necessary when you're working with clients and things like that, because then you kind of have this contract between them and the clients. And that's all fine and good, and I'm not saying they're not important. But I think for what we're doing here, I want to make sure that requirements document is really capturing what it needs to capture, and not just have all this extra fluff, right? Because otherwise the requirements document could become 16 or 20 pages long, and 90% of it is just filler, right? Okay, so a checklist of requirements. And what I'll do is I'll put up like a little example of something. Like maybe I'll show you what the requirements of this little project would have been. Something like that, so you can kind of see what the thing is, okay? So I'll get that up in the morning as well. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes? All right, I will see everybody on next Thursday. I'll see some of you tomorrow.